We are doing the Director's Showcase this weekend. Some of you might just be here because you're Doctor Who fans, but to explain what we're all doing here this weekend is the DGC is showcasing some of our most incredible directors and their work. And tonight we're going to play Heaven Sent, which is an incredible episode from Doctor Who. Highest reviewed, most incredible episodes of Doctor Who. That's of the entire series, and we have the director here tonight to talk about it as well. So thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy. So please give a warm welcome for Rachel, who directed that incredible episode. We're going to talk a lot about this episode, but I was curious when you were growing up, and when was the first time you ever saw a Doctor Who episode? What was your first time you heard the word Doctor Who?
Well, I probably heard, my parents are British, so I probably heard about it early on, but we lived in England when I was 14 and 15 in the 70s, and Tom Baker was my doctor, and we watched it every week. And it was tremendous, and I was very suspicious when they were rebooting it. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I was very, very suspicious when they were rebooting it, and I was like, how are they going to do that? And just knowing that it was made with tinfoil in the old days for nothing. And the second I saw it, we were in England again. I was working on Wind in the Willows. And the second I saw it, I was like, oh my God, how did they do that? How did they do that so well? How did they do that? I have to work on this. I have to work on this. So it was incredible to see the love that goes into the reboot.
And so by the time they did the revival, you were already a successful working director. And yes. you started in movies first, right?
Yes.
And then, and you tell me about your first transition, because you were working not as a director at first, right?
Right. So I started absolutely at the absolute bottom as a production assistant, as a volunteer production assistant, making coffee with John Waters on polyester.
Yeah.
And the really.
So what was he like as a mentor?
Yeah. How long do you have? It would be better if he were here, because he can entertain you, endlessly entertaining. And the long story short is the first movie I worked on, which was Polyester, was with New Line Cinema. I got to meet the head of New Line, and immediately he asked me to work on the next film that they were making, which was in New York. And then I moved to LA and was working with Roger Corman, which is sort of the film school of the 80s, where lots of people got their first opportunities, and Jim Cameron worked as a production designer. And they ended up calling me and saying, so I had done my degree in math, and so they decided that they had no money and they didn't know what they were doing. And on this film I did in New York, they said, oh, well, you were a math major, so you should be our accountant, because we don't have anybody to be our accountant. And of course I knew nothing about accounting. I mean, being a math major does not make you know anything practical, but I said, sure. And when they came to LA in the early 80s to do Nightmare on Elm Street, they said, will you be the accountant? And I had been doing more production work. So I said, okay, but I also want to do a production job. And they sent me out to location manage, which of course does not work. You know, one is an in-the-office job and one is an out-on-the-field job. So somewhere in between there, I was doing all the accounting and finding locations. So I found the Nightmare on Elm Street house.
Wow.
And with the success of Nightmare 1, they offered me the same thing on Nightmare 2, and I said, no, I'd rather production manage. You know, I'm making my way up through the independents. I'd like to production manage, and so they said yes. And then when the third one came around, they said, will you production manage? And I said, I'd like to line produce, and they said yes.
So what's above line producer?
And then when Nightmare 3 was extremely successful, and I often say that everything I know I learned on Nightmare on Elm Street, and particularly on Nightmare 3, where we had to do every type of effect and stunt, and it was the most incredible learning place, learning on the job. And so then they gave me a job internally at New Line as an internal producer, at which point I ended up doing Hairspray with John Waters and Nightmare 4, and then Crybaby, which was, they gave me a leave to do Crybaby, which was outside of New Line. And a film that the head of the company, Bob Shea, directed called Book of Love. And after I survived producing for the head of the company, I said I'd really like the opportunity to direct. And to my surprise, they said yes. And I ended up on Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare.
Awesome. And what was that first film like, kind of proving yourself as a director?
It was, so a lot of people want to know sort of how did you get into directing, and that was such an unusual path. And so there was something to say about having been an accountant, I understood all the elements involved in filmmaking, even if I hadn't done them all. But I'd paid for them all. And then having been a producer on the same series and worked on the same series for 5 films, I felt very, very, very comfortable within the genre of what we were doing. And I was asked to make the film funnier. And having sort of come out of the John Waters world, that felt very comfortable. So some people dislike now that it's the campiest of the Nightmare on Elm Streets, but we actually significantly upped the box office numbers because of that. So at that point, it made sense.
So you were right.
No, well, it was what I was asked to do. It's not the film I would make now.
Right.
But I think it's so terrifying directing, and it really helped that I was very confident about all the production issues. But the second you had to talk to an actor, it was like, So that was the main part, was like, oh, what do I say? And you just, and developing the ability to talk to actors was something I really developed as I went along directing, and didn't really have any training in that in any way.
So for any of the directors that are here that are scared of talking to actors, what is a quick secret that they can use?
Well, one of the things that I do, first of all, remember that the actors are scared too. So a lot of the actor behavior is, if you get bad behavior from actors, a lot of times it's because they're scared or you're being unclear. And they certainly don't want direction which is complicated. So, because then you're in their heads. So you have to, number one is try and understand and figure out what each actor needs. There are no hard and fast rules, as you know. Mm-hmm. So you need to try and interpret within, 2 seconds. How each actor, and I know Natalie's here, who's been directed by me, so she can come and talk about it. But
every actor's different.
Yeah, every actor's different. But one of the things that I try and do, which I don't think they teach you, is I try and make a lot of my directions questions, even if it's "do you think?" Because then the actor feels involved in the solution. First of all, it gives them the opportunity to say no, but then they can't. They often, if they do that, then they're left having to say why. And in the process of saying why, they think about what the question was and what the direction was. And sometimes they're absolutely right, and sometimes in that process it opens a dialogue. And the other thing that it does is it allows them to think about, how am I going to solve the problem, as opposed to feeling like they're being told what to do. And I think it's a real problem for actors if you just do it this way, as opposed to, do you think it might be funnier if we try this? Or what are your, it's just a question of being softer and more, and involving them more.
Definitely. I've done that with editors and all sorts of other people too, because it definitely encourages collaboration.
Yeah.
So you did that first film. You did some other films, of course, with Tank Girl, which has become a huge cult classic, basically. But at some point you transitioned into TV. So what was that transition like?
So Tank Girl killed my career.
Everyone now thinks of it as a huge success.
I know, everyone thinks of it as a huge success, but it was a box office failure and was considered in Hollywood a disaster at that time. And so I was in movie jail, and have been for a long time. And I was asked by Working Title to go to England and produce The Borrowers for them. They wanted somebody with a lot of effects experience who also had some knowledge about working in the UK and in the US, and had some sympathy for the UK, but could also bring some of the North American sensibilities. So I said, okay, if you're going to pay me to learn how to produce in the UK, this seems like a good job. And it was a blast. And then they said, will you come? There were 550 visual effects, and they said, will you stay for an extra 6 months and supervise all the visual effects? And I said, well, I'm going to look for some TV work because I'd like to be directing again. And they said, okay, as long as you supervise the visual effects. And they assumed that I would not get any work immediately, and 3 days later I got offered my first piece of television. And it was a complete shock to me. I had no idea. In television, in features, there's a huge amount of time to prep and a huge amount of support. And in television, there's no time, and everything is on the director. So you frequently, nobody has read the script except you and the actors. So you've got a director of photography, and they're just basically, what do you want? And they don't have no idea what the flow of the script is or anything. So that
because they've been doing the last episode.
Yeah,
right?
because they're just going episode to episode to episode. So it's better now, a lot especially in high-profile cable, where there's a real care for. And I mean, for instance, in the UK. You tend to get your own, on Doctor Who, you get your own director of photography and AD and editor, which is amazing. Yeah, you get to bring in your own person because it's such a huge, like every episode is a movie. But being thrown into the whirlwind of television, and I think what new directors in television discover is that they didn't realize that they were 100% responsible for their schedule. And that's the shock is, I think I'm going in to direct, but actually I'm going in to function around a schedule and create and produce footage to give to producers and somehow try and satisfy myself as well.
Yeah, get what the
survive.
showrunner wants on the schedule the producer wants, and I'm in charge of that, yeah.
Yeah.
So you were doing TV, you did lots of TV, you've been doing TV for so many amazing shows, and then you saw the revival for Doctor Who. How did you get hired on it?
So I had an agent in the UK from way back on The Borrowers when I did several shows in the UK. And I said to her, I really, really, really want to do this show. And I had 3 sets of interviews over a 5-year period. And each time I went in, and actually somebody on set last night asked me, what's a director's interview? Like, what do they ask you in a director's interview? And I was thinking, well, you tend to want to guide those interviews because most of the time the producers don't actually know what to ask. So there's a way to sort of guide those interviews. But in this case, I was meeting first and foremost with the line producer, not the creator, not the showrunner, not because I started looking with Russell T Davies and then moved on in the Moffat era. And I just kept saying I got to the point on the 3rd interview, 4 or 5 years later, where I said, what do I need to say to convince you that I can do, I need to say and do to convince you that I'm seriously in need of doing this show? And shockingly, he said, well, I'd like to see a reel. And at this
Wow.
at this point, I had 80 hours of directing or something. And at the end of seeing and I was like unbelievably shocked that I could go into this interview and he basically had no idea who I was. And so I put together a reel, which I didn't have because I had 80 hours of and all these effects. And wow, you've really done a lot of effects and
Wow, you're perfect.
yeah, wow. So they said, so then I heard nothing for 6 months, and then they called me and said, we have the 2-part finale of the season before this available. Stephen Moffat is writing it. You have to do it. If Stephen takes the time to meet with you and do a long-distance phone call, you have to commit to the movie, to the show, and can you leave in 8 days? So I'm like, I'm calling my man, I'm calling my family, and everybody like, yeah, okay. So then they call me and they say, okay, he's going to call you on Thursday at this hour, and Thursday, and they're going to tell you when the interview is in a couple days. And then you don't hear anything, and they must have hired somebody else. And then on Wednesday, it's like, he's going to call you on Thursday at this time. And then Thursday rolls around and there's no phone call. And it's like, oh, he was busy. And in the meantime, my brain, of course, is exploding because you're on your end, and it's the most important thing going on. And they've got, 12, 13 episodes and everything else going on. And you're this tiny, but quietly and... So finally they say, or hugely apologetic, can we do it on Sunday at this time? And I'm sitting on Sunday morning waiting for this interview, and then the producers get on the phone, and there's 3 of them, and Moffat's one of them, and I've done all my homework, and I sort of start to open my mouth, and they just start joking around with each other And I sit there and I'm like, okay, and so do you want to do this? And I'm like, yeah. And they go, okay, well, we'll see you next week. And they've made jokes with each other, and they've been cool, and Moffat's been hilarious like he is. And okay. And then it's Sunday. So I call my agent and I say, well, I think that they said, I'll see you next week, but I don't really know. I don't really know what that means. And then I have to wait 24 more hours to determine that they actually did mean, yes, we'll see you next week. And the main thing that they told me was, you have no idea how low budget these shows are. And I have to say, you have no idea how low budget the show is. To the point where, and I had this sort of mindset that I will succeed at this. If I've worked this hard to get this job, of course, it's probably going to be this massive disaster. And how do I make this work? And I will just succeed at this no matter what. So everything I learned on Nightmare on Elm Street to do stuff with nothing on a totally low budget is what I ended up using to do Doctor Who. And they were so relieved. Because when I first got there, they thought I was a big deal director who was coming in. I was the first person to come in from North America. And they thought that I was going to have huge budget attitude. And they were afraid that I would say, no, we can't do, I must have all this equipment, I must have. And I must say that it would have been nice to have been able to have a decent cup of coffee. But the tea was good. But the minute that I just sort of put the low budget independent filmmaking cap on and started working like that, they were so relieved. And Peter Bennett, who's the day-to-day producer on the show, who I think is a genius, he was Mr. Hands-on. How do we do this? How do we give Stephen everything he ever wanted? And we worked together very, very hand in hand. So for instance, in that episode, there's the melting hand. And Stephen scripted this melting hand, and the visual effects company wanted tons of money for it. And then they said, okay, well, we'll do it practically. And the practical guys go, oh, I don't know. And they did these tests with styrofoam that were horrible. And then they're like, oh, we can't do this. I'm like, what are you talking about? So my daughter and I went and got Lush bath bombs that the kids make. And we did a concept test, and we put them in a rubber glove and cut the rubber glove and filmed on the iPhone the melting it with an eyedropper, and sort of to embarrass this proof of concept, sent it to Moffat and said, I think we can do this for like less than 50 pounds. And they had been asking for hundreds of, a couple of £1,000 to do the shot. And so that was the director I became and the wonderful thing about the group is that they are all that passionate about Doctor Who. So even though you have no money and you're working with this, Lush bath bomb, there's this incredible meticulous work to make it as beautiful as you can make it.
And so what's it, you're incredibly passionate about Doctor Who. You've gone through 5 interviews. You've done, for years trying to get onto the show. You're a very successful TV director, but what's it like walking onto the set and with the people that are making something that you're a huge fan of and the responsibility of that?
So I was terrified. And I arrived, and of course I was trying to be a little bit cool, so I hadn't gone fan, fanboy, fangirl, fan. So, and there's, as I said, everybody's trying to figure out what I'm going to be like because they're used to their British directors. And so they say, and I arrive, and I'm terrified, and I'm jet lagged, and they say, would you like to go on the TARDIS? And it's like, yes! And then it's like, can I sneak on the TARDIS and do selfies? Can I? And the wonderful thing about being there, and I was there for many, many months on the 7 episodes I made, is that everybody comes to visit, and all they want to do is go on the TARDIS and have it lit. And there's a person, so taking people on tours taking Armando Iannucci on tours of the TARDIS. People are so excited. Chris Addison, so excited to be on the TARDIS, and you just sort of embrace that world of nerd fandom, and it's amazing.
Incredible. And so you do the finale of season 8, basically.
Yeah.
And did you know in that moment with doing those 2, I assume you block shot those 2 together, or did you do one and then the next? Or
in that case, we block shot.
Yeah. And then did you know, okay, that's it, I did it? Or did you have a feeling you were going to be doing, because you did many, many more episodes after that?
So I was hopeful that I was succeeding. And you do a weird thing. There's two things you do in the UK that are completely weird. One is that at the end of every week of filming, the editor cuts together your footage and sends it to everyone. And which, if any directors in this room, it's an absolute nightmare. And I said, and as a Directors Guild, they can't do that here. You're absolutely protected. But they're like looking at these, and you don't get to look at it. You don't know what the editor's putting it together. So there's that. And then when you finally screen the film, the episode, you screen it with the producers in the room. So I'm sitting there watching Moffat watch the material. And it is the most heart-wrenching, difficult, impossible, especially for my first two episodes when I didn't know him at all. And he's scary. I mean, he's so smart and so imbued in everything. And I was just, and you're sitting there and he's writing notes and you're looking, why did he write a note there? What note did he write? What's going on? Is he writing a laundry list? What is he doing his dinner plans? What's going on? And they make you, they ask you to show, because Stephen wrote each of the episodes that I directed, he asks to see every piece of material. So there's always a few things that didn't work out very well, and then you're like in cringe mode as well, and you're sitting back there. But ultimately, I actually think it's wonderful because Stephen kept saying, you're just damaged from North American television. We're here to make, we're here to work together. So. And occasionally he would say, do you have this shot? And I'd be like, no, I'm so sorry. Rachel, I was just asking. I wasn't judging. We're going to solve these problems. So those moments were amazing because you were working with the showrunner, and then he would give all his notes, and then you and the editor would go off and work together to make the episode better, and then work with Stephen again. So unlike North American television, where you work for 3 days, you hand it off, and something comes out back. So when people say to me, why is your UK work so elegant? I'll say because I was allowed to massage each cut. So Stephen might, and there were a couple of times, especially in the first season, where Stephen would say, I just don't think you spent enough time on this scene. Just go back and massage it. And that's the most amazing note. Like, I think this scene can be better, as opposed to cut 3 frames here, and I want to be in the close-up here, and it's much more about a rhythm filmmaking.
Are there any other differences to directing for Doctor Who than sort of other normal TV?
Just how low budget it is, and how passionate people are, and how low budget it is, and no overtime. I mean, BBC Wales has really strict rules, so no overtime. So we did 11-hour days, half an hour for lunch, from the time they called it until you came back, so that if you were last in line, you were still like waiting for your food and you were already called back. But filmmaking's, I mean, a lot of it is that, as you know, is that it's still about, everything is still about, will my shots visually enhance the script? So that's number one, no matter what. And this was the most, can I segue to this?
Yeah.
Stephen said he had a great deal of trouble. I mean, first of all, they called me and they said, we want you to come back for season 9. Hallelujah. I was so relieved. And Stephen wants you to do the finale again. And he's doing the first of the 2-parter. It's going to be Peter Capaldi alone with weeping angels in a haunted house. And I was like, okay, cool. Peter Capaldi alone, cool. So then, okay, a concept episode, great, but Weeping Angels, not quite sure whether there's a place to go with making them, I mean, brilliant in Blink, but not sure. But okay, and a haunted house, totally cool. And I arrive, and I get the first 10 pages of the script, because Stephen's notoriously, now I can say this now, he's notoriously slow and late with all your scripts. So he hands the first 10 pages, and it's Peter Capaldi alone in a clockwork castle. So, and they haven't saved very much money, because we're going to make a haunted house, and we have the Weeping Angels. Well, now it's a new monster, and it's a clockwork castle. And Peter Bennett's like, and I read this first 10 pages, and I'm like, this is the entire budget of a Doctor Who episode in the first 10 pages. And I called Peter Bennett and I go, what are we going to do? And he goes, well, yep, we're going to figure it out. And then for like 3 weeks, we're waiting for the next, and then Stephen delivers 10 more pages. And I, Stephen, will you tell me what's, he knew where he was going with the end. He knew we were going to Gallifrey. He knew that the 4.5 billion years, but he was playing with the puzzle, and Stephen will not deliver anything until what he delivers is pretty much what you're going to shoot, because he's worked that hard on it. So unlike many writers that we work with, who you get a first draft and a second draft, and Stephen, you might get small changes, or if enough people ask a question that they don't understand something, he might fix it. But so he did not deliver the last 10 pages of the script until a week before we started shooting. And I changed when I understood what the script was about, because up until then I had a different theory of what the script was about. And I looked at Stuart Biddlecombe, the cinematographer, and I said, we're shooting this wrong. And I changed the entire feel of and rhythm of how we were going to shoot the whole episode in a week before we started shooting.
So what was your concept, and what did you change it to?
Well, I can't remember. I honestly can't remember exactly, but it was much more of an action. I thought we were going to have a much stronger action ending, and that I, not understanding that it was actually this repetitive, I didn't know the whole thing was a repetitive nightmare. And I stay with the very first time you read a script is the time you're the audience. So I try and stick with those things that I remember for the first time, and there's two specific moments in this that were important. One is when he digs into the dirt and it says, I'm in 12. And for you Doctor Who fans, 12 being Dr. 12.
He's the 12th Doctor.
The 12th Doctor. It says, I'm in 12. And I was certain that we were going to find Clara in some incarnation in 12. So I wanted to make sure we didn't ever lose that tension there and the possibility that that could be what was going to happen. And I didn't know what we were going to find until this last minute. But I had been thinking about kind of shooting a more active, lot more camera movement and a lot more action-oriented, and then when I finally understood the repetitive nature, and Stephen was like, it doesn't matter that it's repetitive, you can never give any of that away. So I had to constantly remind Peter, this is the first time you've been here, this is the first time you've been here. So it became a much more lyrical and quietly beautiful. And Stephen had two other instructions. He said, make it beautiful, make it scary, and no lighting allowed, in terms of no electric light, no torches, the only light that he defined was we had the firelight in that one scene. And so the DP and I are like, okay, well, where's the light coming from? So we had to conceptualize all that as well. I mean, there are tremendous challenges to that episode.
So with the repetition, did you end up just shooting every scene once, or did you shoot every kind of the end of every scene a few times, or how did you conceptualize, how it all climaxes?
Well, first of all, although he sort of wrote the montages, and the AD had to create an entirely his own numbering system to say this is incarnation number 12 of this. But ultimately, with the small amount of time we had, I basically just made sure with things that would repeat that I had a variety of shots, and I would have the main way that I wanted it to be cut, and then a lot of different extra pieces when there was time. And sometimes there wasn't time to do what we needed to do, let alone additional things.
I can imagine. So when you get a script like this, but for all your shows, what is your process for kind of when you get a script and because it's different when you're doing a TV show, because there is a sort of creative entity above you that is in charge of the whole show. You aren't the creative end of it. So what's your process for taking the material and kind of breaking down what you're going to do?
So it depends. I mean, on American television, you're generally fitting into the feel of the whole show. So you spend a lot of time watching other episodes. Or if there aren't other episodes because you're on season 1, you read all the other scripts and you try and get deeply into what the show is. And then, as I said, the first time I read it, I'm the audience. So it's really important to keep, if I thought that line was funny when I read it, then I can make it funny on set, even if the first time you see it, it may not be funny. You can talk to the actor about, this is supposed to be a joke. Or that can come back, because things get stale as you're tired and as people are just in the grind of television. But on the British episodes, because it's really its own movie, even though it's a different thing, because and they embrace on Doctor Who that every episode is every world is different, every episode is different. So for me, the Doctor Who challenge was that on the 7 episodes I did, to make them all different and to make the choices, because there's certain things that are just my taste, to make the choices that there should be a different lighting feel and a different for each one. So if you go through my different episodes, you'll see a different feel for each of them. I didn't
have a Christmas one.
I didn't want to do a lot of smoke in this. I didn't think it was justified. I wanted minimal smoke, except in the Citizen Kane, but in other, or when it was specific to mist. In my spaceship, it's just full of smoke and shafts of light and that look. So, and there were always reasons behind that and color schemes and ideas, but you're trying to figure out, it just really comes down to what will enhance what's on the page, what visuals enhance what's on the page.
Yeah, awesome. And then with this episode in particular, what were the specific challenges? What were the hardest parts of making, it's a very unique episode because it just has him and you
so Peter,
making an episode. So what was the hardest part?
Peter was ecstatic. I mean, he's like, it's a dream come true. But he had only read the script like a day before. I mean, he's shooting up until the day, and suddenly, and one of the first things we do is his death in the TARDIS. So we start in the TARDIS because the sets aren't built yet, and immediately he's collapsing on the floor of the TARDIS and dying. And I mean, worship to him for having just full on impassioned, 100% embracing. And what the instruction from Stephen was, make sure that Peter he doesn't bring Clara's death into every moment of it. So also trying to find places where there could be lighter and Doctor's humor. And so that was an interesting, the second or third day we went to Cardiff Castle, and it took a long time to get the equipment up into the turrets and around into the battlements. And so that was the time that Peter and I sat down, and he talked about how he had mapped the script, and I talked about how I had mapped the script, and we put those things together and chose those moments. But we were 3 days into filming so it is amazing that anything ever works. And Stephen said to me when he said, I'm handing you the hardest script I've ever written. I don't know if it can be done. So to end up with something where the first time I showed it to him, he was in a really bad mood. Like he and Peter had been fighting on set that morning. I'm like, okay, I'm going to show it. And that didn't happen very often. And that's within this room, but they were having an issue about something, and easily resolved. Good friends now. But, it was just that moment, and he came in sort of that dark mood, and I'm like, okay, and now you're going to watch Peter alone for what was then 65 minutes, and he watches the first 3 minutes, and he writes a couple of notes, and then he stops writing notes. And then I knew I was and I just watched him for 60 minutes, just watched the film. And he said, I just didn't think it could be done. And that's what he said when we finished watching. I didn't think it could be done. You've done it, Rachel. And that is one of the best moments of my career.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said this is, outside before the screening, you said this is, this and Tank Girl are your favorite things that you've ever made.
Yes.
Very
different.
And so what would you say is the reason that it's your favorite stuff that you've done?
I feel like, the script is just genius. Peter's just genius. Murray Gold's music is incredible. Stewart's cinematography is gorgeous. I felt very, very, it's one of the first times in television I felt like I worked absolutely hand in hand with the cinematographer to get together to get everything we could possibly want, even when it felt like there was no time and we were never going to do it. That the shafts of light, the shadows and the German expressionism feel and things like that we just fought to get in the battlements. When you say, okay, I want to actually light every single window, when they're used to just, oh, we just throw one light up. What do you mean you want all those lights? We can't afford all those lights. I'm like, please, this is really so. And there's little moving, the lights move as the castle moves. And Ben Pickles was hugely helpful in helping me do the concepts for Peter falling and Peter in the water.
It's funny, you told me a few years ago that we have a mutual friend, Ben, who's an incredible visual effects artist, and you had told me that he had saved your butt on an episode, and when I was watching this, I went, I bet this is the episode.
And actually, Ben, I said, can you help me? I mean, early on we were working on, because there were so many huge things in the first 5 minutes. I'm like, okay, falling, and Ben is very young and had done things in high school that were incredible. And he said, here's some ideas on, I said, can we just spitball? And I'm in Cardiff and he's in Vancouver and we're spitballing together and he's giving me ideas on how to do things really, really, really simply that look so much better. And then I'm going back and I said, hey, they want a real lot of money to do the skull dropping. And I know that the expensive part is it hitting the ground. We know it falling through the water isn't difficult. And he goes, yeah, you're right, because sometimes I'm just checking that I'm not crazy. And so I turn around, and he does a concept piece of Peter falling the next day. I wake up in the morning, and he's done this little conceptual thing for me. And then he's created a skull and made it land on the ground. And I had to go to the major visual effects company and say, you have to make it look as good as this. So it says a lot for, I mean.
He's incredible. He's a secret. None of you know.
Yes.
None of you ever hire him because he's ours.
He's ours. He is now, though, a full-time visual effects artist for Doctor Who.
Yeah, incredible. So. And didn't he do the opening for one of the?
Yes, and he did the title sequence for the current Doctor Who. So we introduced him. I got him onto Sherlock. He did some shots on Sherlock. Finally got him to, instead of just being my concept person, actually get to do shots on Doctor Who. And then they sort of realized that our secret genius, and now he's...
now we can't afford him.
Yeah.
So from this episode, what are some... you put so much care and specificity into the whole thing. What are some details that maybe the audience might have missed that are your favorite details that you think deserve to be celebrated?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
I just know as a director, there's always stuff that you fight for that maybe people won't notice, but once they realize it, they love it. I'm
going to talk for a moment about there's a lot, but one of the people who's most I can credit besides Ben is the color timer, the grader in the UK, who is also a genius visual effects guy. And we had a double for Clara in some of the early shots because she was busy filming Victoria. And he actually physically, when we finally had her, he took shots that we actually had and cut them out and replaced her in the where we're supposed to be just changing the color, and he actually spent the time to cut her out and put actual her in and fit it in while we're in the grade. And another thing he did is there's a moment during the bird where the door opens to the staircase up to the and we didn't have a door, and he physically built a door during the color timing to make that door slide open. So incredible. And a lot of things like, how do you match all the different castles? What are we going to build? How do you take the build with the real? And there's a lot, and they didn't want to build as much as we had to build. And I kept saying, like when we went into the bedroom and you see down the hallway, I kept saying, hey, we have to build those two things together. And they wanted the bedroom to be on a location because it would be cheaper. And to Pete Bennett's credit, he just ultimately ended up saying, yeah, okay, we've got to do that. This is how we have to do it. A lot of time went into working out the circular hallway where the Veil's hand comes in and where you look across. And at one point, we're filming on our iPhone and reversing things, and so that we're trying not to relight in the amount of time we have and use the circular corridor and only go in one direction, but make the light look like it's going in the opposite direction. So huge details like that. When we go into the bedroom the first time, Peter wanted to, and you couldn't hear this, but he's talking about the fact that the veil is his nightmare from his childhood. And he wanted to play it very, very, very seriously. And it's one of the few times that we had to stop on set and say, and it was one of the places I'd identified where he could actually be quite fun and Peter comedic. And we kind of had to sit down and say, why? He's like, why would you? And I can see why he read it and thought, oh, this is my moment to play this great drama. And I had to sit down and talk him into doing the comedic version. And it was because we had not filmed anything up until then. And I said, but all the other stuff's serious. And he said, oh, right, because we haven't filmed any of it yet. So I said, this is your moment to break. And then it was, oh, right, you're not in my head. You don't know what I'm planning for all the other stuff. And that's all part of the process of working in different directions and nobody knowing what you're doing and figuring it out at exactly where you're there.
It's one of the biggest challenges because as a director, you've seen it all in order in your head, but no one else has because you've just been doing all these slices. Pretty incredible.
And I'm finding that even now I'm working with some inexperienced producers who keep asking you questions about stuff that you're getting to. And you're like, well, yeah, because you can't understand because, I'll show you my shot list, but you don't understand. And that shot really visually told the story, but no, I didn't shoot that shot first. And so it's a challenge when people are questioning you before you're...
Well, and talk to me a little bit about, you've been basically at the vanguard of being a female director. Way before it was cool. You must have had quite a journey over the last, how long have you been directing? Must be...
I've been directing since 1990.
Yeah.
I did
so
He's Dead.
How has being a female director changed and how hasn't it changed over the last, 20 years?
So when I started, things were getting better for women directors and I was very optimistic. And I was the only female director who'd done a horror franchise. I mean, doing Nightmare on Elm Street, I didn't even think about it being such a big deal until nobody has done it since. I mean, maybe now, but it was incredibly, and up through the mid to 1996, 97, statistics were improving for women, and I was like, I'm making Tank Girl, and I'm kicking through the glass ceiling, and women superheroes are going to be. Completely, absolutely confident that this was going to be the thing, and when that door closed on me, everything also at the same time changed in the industry in the next couple of years. And I really call the 2000s the dark ages because that's the time when women had no opportunities and fighting to work at all during that time period and always being told to be like somebody, we like this male director, you need to be like that. You need to be louder, you need to be more this, you need to be more that, which the ACLU said, of course, all these things are actually illegal to tell you how to and especially to be more like somebody, a different gender. Right. But in order to keep working, I was basically told, shut up, never mention that you're a woman, do your work, and just absolutely never question anything. Just put your head down and do it. And up until about 2012, I was just at that place where I could just get enough work to keep going. And that was more than most women. I mean, we lost a whole generation of women filmmakers in that time period because they couldn't keep it going. And I was lucky. And I also went to the UK enough where there was a lot more opportunities for me. But when I came back, I could just keep it going. And then in 2012, it was actually before Me Too, when a group of women directors in the DGA went to the ACLU, and the ACLU basically went to the studios and researched it for 2 years and said, this is a systematic failure, and we will sue you if you guys don't get your act together. And at that point, everything sort of started to come together in terms of and the change is tremendous. And I see women directors I know here who've been part of the beginning of these opportunities, but equally, and so things are, and you're responsible for training programs, Zach. So thank you.
Well, it's not fixed yet, but it's getting.
Yeah, but it is vastly, and therefore now my experience, and especially with everything I learned on Nightmare on Elm Street. And for me, it happened at the same time that I got Doctor Who, and so I had a double whammy of it's better to be a woman. People are looking for women directors. I have effects experience. I have experience, and then I had these samples of work that were extremely well received, and then I got to do Sherlock, and then it was like, oh, okay. So I had a lot of good things happen at once, but the change, without all that, the change is significant, but less than perfect.
Yeah. And then just briefly before we go open for questions, obviously this episode is one of the most highest, rated episodes and critically reviewed episodes of Doctor Who, and you've been doing all sorts of other amazing stuff with Sherlock, and then lots of shows here locally like The Flash and Supergirl and Legends and all that. And tell us a little bit about what you're doing, what you're working on now. What you can say.
I can say it has been announced. I'm doing a film for Netflix, and an actual movie.
Big movie too.
Yeah.
Not making the props yourself.
Yeah. Yes. Not making, with a decent budget, for the family division. It's based on a series of books called A Babysitter's Guide to Monster Hunting. So you can see where I would fit into the. So it's family, scary, fun. Huge effects again, so that's where creatures and monsters and but with a light, humorous touch.
So we'll all
and
hopefully
I'm filming
be able to
as
see
we
it soon.
speak.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we're going to open up for questions. Any questions about directing and about Doctor Who? We have an expert on both here. We've got microphones coming down for anyone. Why don't we do this one here?
Hi. How was working with the music in Doctor Who?
So Murray Gold, who did all the music until the last season. I mean, he did all the first 10 seasons, series. Very much my way. This is how I'm doing it. Not that interested in collaborating. I mean, in collaborating with directors. But Murray and I had worked together in the past, and so I had a smaller door in terms of, but he watched it, and so often he would just go and do his work, and then I would call him and go, Murray, please, can you at least do this or this? But he was like, no, this is my show. And he's a genius, but you still wanted your impact. And he called me after he watched this, and he said, this is the best episode of Doctor Who, and I'm writing you a symphony. And I mean, this is just epic, and I'm wall-to-wall music. I'm writing the, and he wrote this absolutely remarkable, stunning score. Couldn't wait to play pieces for me. Couldn't wait to, just so this is it. And they live record, so I got to go in and it's magical to go into the, and you go in while they're recording, and you walk in and they say, this is the director, and they all, hit their violin, and you're like, especially as somebody who's not particularly musical. But I had this moment with Murray where there's the moment in the middle where the doctor says, I give up, and he's in the TARDIS, and it goes quiet while we do that really wide shot where he just sits on the staircase alone. And Murray had kept the music going all the way through it. And I said, Murray, I'm sorry to have an opinion, but would you take a look at, I'm going to drop the music at that moment. I really think it needs to be a silent moment. And he said, no, I think this is perfect. So I said okay, this is all, it's like Conan Silence story. So I dropped the music. So I said, okay, and then the wonderful music editors dropped the music out, and I still think that 52 minutes of music as opposed to 52 and a half minutes of music is genius. So his passion for it, his love of it was just, and I couldn't tell him how to compose that, even if I wanted to.
Well, we heard the music very well tonight.
Yes,
so.
we did.
It was probably the height of hearing the music. Another question? Yeah. Why don't we do this young lady over here?
Hi. I just had a question about the visual, because you mentioned a lot of low budget, and I know that digital effects and that sort of thing are really more high budget in a lot of cases. And I was just wondering, on working on the episode and working on Doctor Who, how much of it really is practical and how much of it is special effects and animation and stuff, because sometimes you never know.
Right. So what I really enjoy at the moment is trying to figure out which should be practical and which should be digital. And often you can do things many ways, and part of the decision is, and I like doing, and doing things practically is more time consuming. So doing things practically on set is more time consuming, but often less, not always, but often less expensive. So there's a tendency now to say, well, just let the visual effects people do it because so you don't spend the time on set. But it's very hard to get that natural feel when you do things it's hard to get the messiness. And when you do things practically, something goes wrong and things are messier and people respond to that more viscerally. So there was a period of time when it was so cool that you could do everything with computers, and then everything became so clean and perfect. And now we've gone much more back to what you can do practically. And there's no science to it. I mean, you have to make your own decisions as well, like how much time do I have? How hard is this? With Who, clearly money goes into certain specific, very expensive digital effects, like the castle in the water, the Gallifrey at the end. Clearly, the visual effects company, and then all the small effects they don't want to do. So they charge way too much in the hopes that you'll cut them out, or you'll find other ways to do them. And they just want to do the things that end up on their reel. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, actually, yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Another question? Yeah, why don't we do this guy behind you? Yeah. We'll just pass the mic around.
Honored to hear your portrayal of how this episode went. It's really cool. What I really took away from the episode was the theme of sentimentality enables perseverance, and I think that's so hard to articulate. So it's, the elegance and the nuance is so clear. And you mentioned the time frame that's impossible to really think things out that thoroughly. Is that something that happens organically just because of the love and the magic that happens through that compressed time frame, or is that something that comes through collaboration with Moffat and yourself, or?
Well, the script is genius to start with, so that's the starting point. But it's often surprises me how much stuff actually does come together and how much better it becomes with all the right people put together. So Will Oswald did an incredibly beautiful job editing it. And so much of the elegance in there is Will's additional point of view to do with that, and Stuart's cinematography and Michael Pickwoad's the production design. On the other hand, there's the side of the production design where Michael hands you a piece of plastic and says, you can just make an asbantium wall out of this. And we're testing, like, oh God, it's a piece of plastic. How are we going to make it look amazing?
I thought it looked amazing, so you did a great job.
But that was a really tough one. On the other hand, some of the portions of this set were absolutely stunning. So where you can't tell what's what, and really difficult to understand, like the discussions of the wide shots of the castle rotating and how are the spokes going to work. And it's practically, and this side of it's like, it doesn't actually fully make practical sense, but everybody calm down because you're just mesmerized. Mm-hmm. But back to your question, it is a combination of, there was a beautiful rhythm to the script, and that went into our view of the beauty of how we should shoot it. And I designed very, very, very attentive to Stephen's script, and that idea that, and the quote you probably didn't hear, which is the one about, it's all about grief. Mm-hmm. So it's not the day they die, you're busy, it's all the days afterwards. To me, that's one of the most poetic and resonant moments in the meaning of the episode.
That one barely poked through in the mix. Yes. In this
it's a beautiful. I've just butchered it, but it's a beautiful Moffat quote. But sort of keeping that as a lyrical feel. And then there's a lot of good luck when things work. I'd like to say that Hitchcock designed every single beat, but I just kept faith in the feel of the script.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Why don't we do the question right behind you? Yeah.
Hi, Rachel. My question is, well, there are two things. One is around stamina. How do you look after yourself when you're going through all of these challenges? And then the other is around politics. You know, how do you know when to let go of what you want?
Well, in with Moffat, it was great because after I got to know him and became a favored director, then it becomes a really open dialogue. So your dream is to be with a showrunner who you can have an actual open dialogue with. And there are other times there and other shows, and Amanda Tapping and I often talk about this, that there are situations where all you do is say, I'm here for you and this is yours, and just help me bring your vision to give you footage for your vision. But in an ideal world, and what I love particularly about doing the shows in the UK is it is much more of a director's, in television it is much more of a director's medium. And then there would be a place with Stephen where he would want to change something and I would just ask him why. And there were always really interesting reasons why. And I learned from that. So even now I'm saying, okay, and I remember once on Sherlock, he said, you can't play the joke in the wide shot here. It has to, no, you can't play the joke in the mirror. And I'm like, but the shot's so cool. And he's like, but you're stepping on the humor, Rachel. I'm like, okay. And I learned, but that's a big learning. Oh, right, you can't play the joke in the mirror. Okay, process that one. And he's right. And stamina, I don't, as you know, I don't really take care of myself. You just try and keep the adrenaline up at all times. I tried, you go into every show thinking I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And then you're basically like, just how am I going to get through this? So it would be lovely to say that I was incredibly careful. But my DP said to me last night, you don't eat, you just snack. And I'm like, yeah, actually, that's true. You don't need.
Well, a lot of people may not realize you were shooting a night shoot last night and still managed to come here today. So,
but one of my producers is here too, and so she was there even longer than I. So thank you, Alona.
Well, we're gonna wrap up now, but we're gonna have we have some snacks outside and drinks and music, and so we can still continue the conversation out there. She will need to get to sleep soon because she has a big shoot day on Monday. But thank you, everyone, so much for coming.